People who are on extremely fat-restricted diets can get bile that becomes very thick and kind of sludgy, so to speak. And actually, you can have testing done and they'll comment and say that there's a bile sludge, thick bile. Well, thick bile often leads to a lot of... Thanks for coming to the channel. I'm Dr. A, and I answer your medical questions here. First off, let's look at the concept of what would make a food helpful to liver function. Now, your liver is going to function up until the day you die, and it's going to function at a higher or lower level, but your liver is really one of the more resilient and one of the more complex organs in your body. So anything you can do to support it would be a good thing. There's some things to consider in the world of helping the liver, but you have basically two main categorical areas where a food might be liver supportive or liver helping. So the first category would be nutrient substrate, providing the nutrients and vital cofactors that are needed for liver support. So nutrients might be minerals, might be vitamins. Remember, those go together as cofactors. Might be amino acids, might be particular types of good fats, for example. Might include plant parts, which are like polyphenols, the bioflavonoids, the colorful parts of plants, etc. Could be, amino structures like taurine or methionine, choline, all of these things that go on for the liver. And then the other category would be things that we might consider, and there's crossover in these, foods that are what are called chologogues, which help to so-called move the bile through the system. And we know that bile is created in the liver from bilirubin that you're detoxifying out of your blood. And then that comes together with fatty acids that are being put together and then also detoxified, or just toxic fatty acids that are put together. And then those go out through special structures in the liver, eventually work their way down through the biliary apparatus to the gallbladder. And then the bile sits in the gallbladder till we eat something, usually fats. Proteins will do it too, but usually fats. And then there's hormonal signaling that causes the gallbladder to squeeze down and push the bile out so that it can help you with fat digestion. The movement of those processes through the liver cells and into the storage in the gallbladder is aided by chologogue substances. So you might have heard of a cholecystectomy or cholecystitis. Those are gallbladder problems, but it's looking at bile. So chole is about the bile. So chologogues, things that help the bile moving. So it would be some examples of these things. Well, traditional foods that are used for liver support, actually one is beets, and it turns out it can be both the beet root and the beet greens. They have different constituents from a nutrient profile in them. But if you think about beets, whether it's the beet greens or the beet root, they're both very colorful. They both have a lot of substance. And usually in the plant kingdom, that means that two things are going on. Color comes from the polyphenols, flavonoids, all of those chemicals, big complex chemicals, which is great. We need lots of those for our liver. And then the dense nutrient structure means it's probably going to have a lot of minerals, vitamins. In the case of beets and beet greens, it's going to have some amino acids too. And they all tend to be those that the liver uses a lot of. So we will have people, eat more beets, eat steamed beet greens. They might juice them, all manner of things of beets and beet greens. Kind of like beet greens, another one that can come up that's very supportive would be any dark green vegetables. So you might think of collards or kale, some of the darker lettuces, other darker vegetables. And then you think of maybe cruciferous vegetables, things like broccoli and chard and all of those things. So all of those are going to be like beet and beet green, where they're going to be very dense in vitamins and minerals, some of the amino structures. And then also they're going to be heavy, especially the cruciferous are going to be heavy in sulfur, thiols, sulfur-bearing molecules. And it turns out that the thiol pool of sulfury molecules is part of what the liver can use to improve glutathione function, etc. Other foods that might help your liver, and this often is sometimes misunderstood or controversial, and that can be high quality meat sources. Now, you can overburden your liver if you have too much fat, if you have too much oxidized fat, which can come along with meat, but appropriate portions of high quality, low toxin meats are going to give you a lot of minerals, are going to give you a lot of vitamins, they're going to give you a lot of amino acids and some other things. And so if we have clean meat sources, so you could think of the cleaner sources of high omega-3 fishes, you could think of game meats in some cases or other clean sources of meat. Those actually can be beneficial to the liver. Again, you can overdo anything. And so it's about how much do you want to put in the system, which is portion control. Another one which goes along, and again, you can have too much or too little of these things, would be berries and certain of the darker fruits, because you're going to have a lot of polyphenols, a lot of natural antioxidants. You do want to keep in mind with fruit and berries that they can have a lot of sugar too, depending on what the fruit is. So you want to be, again, like with meat, you want to be thoughtful about the dose or the portion size of things like berries and fruits. Then there's what we would consider good fats. And so you think, well, aren't fats stressful on the liver? Yes, they can be. But fats also are required to help, remember, in the chologogue world of making the bile and getting it out. Good fats actually feed into the formation of less inflammatory bile. And so good fats would be things like your high omega-3 things like certain fish, certain game meats, etc. come with that. Certain types of vegetable matter come with omegas, etc. So fats are very involved. And that's both on the inflammatory balance, but also on helping the bile to flow. People who are on extremely fat restricted diets can get bile that becomes very thick and kind of sludgy, so to speak. And actually you can have testing done and they'll comment and say that there's a bile sludge, thick bile. Well, thick bile often leads to a lot of digestive complaints because the bile can't get out in the quantities needed to emulsify the fat you did eat and can cause a lot of digestive upset. The way to avoid thick bile, aside from a few cofactor things like sulfhydryl groups and methionine and stuff, would be to have enough good fat in there so that when I'm producing bile, I have enough fat in the base of the bile that is non-inflammatory or low inflammatory to let it flow easily. And then there's other things that people put on lists. So coffee and tea. A lot of people, think, oh, coffee is bad for you no matter what. Coffee is a little bit like other things, especially, certain vegetable sources or even animal, where coffee can carry a lot of toxins with it, depending on how it's produced. But if you get a good low toxin coffee and you're not over consuming it, it also has a lot of chemistry in it, a lot of phenols and stuff. It can be supportive to the liver. And tea for the same reasons, although tea is generally made from the leaves of things, and those will have polyphenols, etc. So I hope that this helped as far as like structuring food intake that can be beneficial to liver support, liver function, etc. With any of these things we talked about, you want to remember there's proper amounts, proper portion sizes, and you can always do too much and then it will be a hindrance to the liver. But proper portion sizes, mixing up your diet to have these things in it, at least gives the liver a fighting chance to have the right cofactors and the right phenols and all these other good things to operate appropriately. And then, as we said in a few of these instances, the cleanliness of the food, so the lower toxin forms of the food, so lower toxin fishes, lower toxin plants, etc., the better, because then you're not bringing toxins in to also bother your liver while the foods are trying to help it. All right, I'm Dr. A. Thank you for listening. Thanks for that question. Please do like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you guys on the next video. Check out some of these other links we're going to put up here.